are going to have Robert Stokka join us from Venable, the sub-organization that sounds Venable Blue. I'd like to hear all about that. Talking about the ethical and legal complexities around the use of children's data to train AI models. Robert brings his role here at Venable from having been at two very large platforms in the past. He understands the internal processes and policies when developing programs that protect both internal and external functions. He's drawing his background to lead a team of privacy escalation analysts to respond to and manage end-to-end escalations arising from privacy-related media and regulatory requirements, legal requirements, and onward. Robert's main object is to keep threat actors from abusing platforms and utilize these success stories to implement long-term best practices. I'd like to thank Robert and have him join our stage. Thank you.
All right, I know everyone's getting a little bit hungry, but I'm excited to definitely touch on the Gen AI and the product building journey, starting with the development of the training, the model, and then going into the training data. And so Heimu, who is unfortunately unable to be here today, is our fearless leader at Venable Blue. And as you heard from my colleague earlier, David, and then my other colleague, Christoph, is here today. I will preference, I'm not a lawyer. I wear the policy and product hat. And I'm also manager of program and policy analysts that handle escalations within the generative AI space. So kicking us off, we really want to understand how are Gen AI models trained, looking really at what data are we collecting and how are we choosing to collect that data, and then from the next step, how are we fine-tuning or how are we filtering that data to avoid those high-risk situations that we'll get to later. And then from there, we have the actual user interaction, the prompts, the way the users are interacting with the Gen AI product and platform. That is what we consider a flywheel. So actually feeding back into the training of the model and the improvement, whether for good or for bad, is what you find out later on as these prompts continue in this automatic learning and system, and Gen AI improvement continues to move forward. So looking at that, just starting with the basics of what training data are we using. So training data consists of unauthorized or authorized web scraping, and that can be all across the web, from the dark web to the open web, and daily newspaper articles that we see and find online can then be filtered into these training data sets. And so as we have come to understand through use cases, is that can create high risk or high problematic areas when we're taking images or we're taking scraped web data from the dark web. And then towards the end of there, in the second phase of this presentation, we'll get into the user interaction and the internal data that's used. So the first-party data versus the third-party data, and then the actual interactions from the users. And so, I think so from our example here, we can see that if I'm a company or I'm trying to build a generative AI product, I'm choosing what data set I'm going to be training on or what data set I'm going to use. And for example here, Lion 5B, a very, very large data set that contains billions of text and images. We can choose to use that, but as an internal product, policy, and legal, I need to start thinking of, well, what should I start thinking to ask the questions when using this training data set? Because ultimately, things can come out of that. Risk can happen. So some online data sets can contain CSAM. So it can be a risk of images exploiting children, or conversations that happen in private that are leaked in public. And then data sets are scraped from, again, the dark web or the adult video sites that exist and can be filtered into your generative AI model, whether that's through the prompt or the output that can appear and create high risk and what we call in my space escalations and high risk and dangerous escalations. And so sometimes it might need some fixing or some fine tuning or filtering, or whether that's through filtering of age appropriate data or filtering through the most egregious content you can think of. Sorry, forgot. So where that pops up in this case, again, for the review of Line 5B, which happened last month, is CSAM was found in the image set through the training data. And so thousands of CSAM images were found in that training data set, and the products building off of this data set are now at risk. And so this is huge public scrutiny as well as regulatory scrutiny, and a conversation that needs to be had. And so this is why during that process of vetting these training data sets to be implemented into our generative AI products, how are we thinking and what questions are we asking to avoid this? And so we have to also take a look at that second part of what flywheel or user interaction data we're using. So the user interaction data can be that prompt response or that thumbs up or thumbs down to dislike a response that ChatGPT is spitting out. So how is that data captured for children, and how is that used and fed back into the model to improve that model and user experience ultimately? And the questions we really should ask was interaction data from children used to train the model? A very basic question we should be asking. And what happened to the interaction data collected by children? So what are we exactly doing, and what are we showcasing, and what do we need to use as far as the data collected by children? And then is the children interaction data being shared and used to train other models? So is the model that I'm using for my generative AI product, is that feeding back into the existing model and the larger model and data set to be improved upon? And what children's data and data points are being used? So these should all be questions and discussed throughout the process of when deciding to use that product. And what my team has done over the course of the last year for several big tech companies in creating their generative AI products and thinking through these privacy concerns is a very snippet or snapshot of a very in-depth and large competitive analysis, is taking a look of, well, what is out there as far as other generative AI products? What 13 plus, 18 plus experience is explicitly stated within either the privacy or terms of service? And how is it actually being implemented or used internally by looking at media and open source and having conversations and understanding where the competition is at, but also where is the standard, where is the discussion happening for these platforms as we are rapidly moving through this generative AI adaptation. And so typically what we do and what we provide as a service is you're approached by your product team, and your product team says, hey, we're going to implement a generative AI search engine. We're going to replace our search engine we previously had, and we're just going to implement this, and this is going to be a huge improvement to our product and our platform. So immediately prompting questions from legal, from policy, from product. What are children allowed to enter at the prompt? Is entering their home address a risk? Could that come back and be revealed or be used by someone who is gaming the system to gain addresses or personally identifiable information? What is returned to a child at the prompt? How much information and what kind of information is returned? Is that discussion happening? Is it a large chunk of misleading or false information? Are the children, is what the children's being returned in that prompt, is it easily able to be broken down? Or is it maybe harmful? Is it CSAM itself, if it's an image or text model? What do you do with the child interaction data collected, and do you use it to train model or fine tune your model? So actually understanding what is happening to that children's data when it interacts, the child interacts with ChatGPT and it's returned to fine tune or train the model. Some more considerations, and from the parents and public perspective, the conversation that's going on, informed consent. Does the consent offered cover using data or trained models? And this is not always clear throughout the privacy policy or the terms of service. Is the informed consent covered? Is transparency and accountability? What are we talking about when we look at transparency and accountability? If CSAM is leaked and I'm using Lion 5B in my generative AI model, who's accountable? Who's responsible for that leak and those images within that training data set with billions of points of data? How is that filtered, and what safeguards and what guardrails are put in place? And then lawyer alert, David is here and better off to answer some of these questions that are more legal related, but privacy and data protection. So how the data is collected, stored, and used. How are we ensuring that it's abiding by privacy and data protection laws? And a way to think of this in the way of get rid of it, says the regulator, is I'm building this model, I'm using this training data set, I'm flywheeling my data, the interaction data back in, is I'm building this model brick by brick as I build a house. And so if we continue to find bricks that don't support the house and that ultimately fall out or fall down, the more bricks we have, the more we see that this house is going to crumble. And so when we're not asking these questions on the training data and the data set and what's involved and what's included, or how is that information scraped from the web and what type of websites are included with this many billions points of data sets, that house could ultimately crumble. And this is the analogy I will use for that slide. Some of those actionable recommendations. So if you're building your own AI models, you want to know where it came from. So that data lifecycle, we want to know how that data and where that data came about. So what information are we scraping, if scraping from the web, or what are those data points? Does it contain children's data? So asking, does it contain children's data? Not just worrying about the data at large or at general and the risk of data, but does it contain children's data? Know what happens to the prompt data when no one is looking. So again, how is that flywheel effect happening? And where is that informed to the public that's using your generative AI set? Or where is that informed to you when deciding to use one and launch that? Trust but verify. What we've seen a long time in decades of content moderation, we are now seeing a lot of red teaming exercises. So although you may trust that host or service providing the training data set, we want to also run our own red teaming exercise. We want to break down or break this machine as far as possible and to be able to ensure that we're providing a safe platform. And then what kind of consent are you getting? So review the opt-outs, the opt-ins. At what point are you allowing to opt out of flywheel or interaction data? At what mechanisms are you using to be more transparent about that and put that forward within your Gen AI product experience? And then, did the parents consent? Under 13, so is there verified parental consent? We see this across the board from 13 plus 18, and some platforms that we've looked into do not mention it at all and do not provide information. If you're using a third-party model, so if you decide to use a vendor who build on top of generative AI products, you're going to want to pull in your policy team. So you're reusing what you gave them. If third parties, party models, what does improve the service mean? So again, when we're thinking about improve the service, we're thinking about, did you like that prompt question? Did you like that response, or did you not? Did you dislike? That's the hidden improve your service that we've seen from companies like Google and Meta and Instagram. And again, siloing what you gave them to help competitors or others think about having that discussion, or how are you using this data? How are you using the children's data through our product? And how are you setting that aside, or how is that included in improve the service when that often phrase is used? Always red team to make sure the service is safe. Don't err on the side of caution. Red team. Through early stages of the product development, we found a lot of issues by red teaming, and there was lots of discussion on how to avoid that. So red teaming is definitely a key on both ends. And do they let you say, nope, that's not for me, going back to the opt-out? Is there any way that opt-outs are provided within the Gen AI service? And if that opt-out is provided, can we actually ensure that that's honored, that that information won't be used moving forward? So whether that's your information used in the training data, or as soon as you start engaging with that product, Gen AI product, is it reused and continue to be reused? And how do we find that information out? A good example or a good use case for that is copyright, and with artists and using copyrighted data. And just covering more lawyer stuff that David can speak to definitely more is protecting your data from unauthorized use for AI model development. So put in your, this is when you pull in your legal teams and add in the contract, the general data use, the notification of unauthorized use, no new uses. So make sure you're understanding from your team's perspective how that data has come about, but how it's being used as well, and set those terms in the contract. And so pulling in your legal team is super helpful and beneficial at that point. That is all I have, but I will say that when working in content policy and working through the products that are created there and deploying the operations and everything that happens, we've gotten good at that from a trust and safety, privacy, and security perspective. With generative AI, those same rules apply in those same methods with some minor tweaks, but the speed and rate of this is something that is very concerning and something we have to work towards very hard to get ahead. And so that's what we're seeing at a very high level, and we're continuing to do comparative analysis and help these Gen AI products get better at what they do.